All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Global Taiwan Institute. My name is Russell Shao. I am the executive director here at GTI. GTI is a 501c3 think tank dedicated exclusively to Taiwan policy research and related programs. Our mission is to enhance the relationship between the United States and Taiwan with the world by contributing to a more informed discussion about Taiwan and its people. And in pursuit of that mission, we undertake several major programs. They include our bi-weekly publication, the Global Taiwan Brief, public seminars, an annual symposium, 3 podcasts, and as well as scholarship and fellowship opportunity. If you're not already subscribed to receive our updates, you may do so by visiting our website at www.globaltaiwan.org. I would be remiss if I began today's program without thanking our co-founders, our board of directors, as well as staff and the interns who make all our programs here today and all our programs possible. So without further ado, let's begin. So today's seminar, CCP Political Warfare and the 2024 elections, is presented in collaboration with the Prospect Foundation based in Taiwan. We're very pleased to have a very distinguished and high-powered delegation here from Prospect, and I just want to make a special acknowledgement of Chairman Mark Chen, who's here in the audience for their continued cooperation. So for both Taiwan and the United States, 2024 is shaping up to be a pivotal year. Less than 3 months, Taiwan will hold its 2024 presidential election as well as legislative elections, followed by the United States here with our own election in November. In the United States and in Taiwan, political candidates in both democracies have begun jockeying for positions, marking out policy positions, and forging critical alliances. And amid this intense competition, an old threat has emerged once again: authoritarian political warfare. Determined to undermine democratic processes and sow distrust in political democratic institutions, both the Chinese Communist Party and Russia have escalated their influence campaigns against the United States and Taiwan and in the world, encompassing a spectrum of activities that can be grouped into largely 5 clusters: intelligence operations, cyber operations, information and disinformation operations, gray zone operations, and economic coercion. While these efforts alone and by themselves are by no means a new phenomenon, they have grown substantially more sophisticated and insidious in recent years, posing a significant risk to the upcoming elections. These threats have only grown more pronounced over the past several years as the CCP and Russian political warfare efforts appear to be increasingly coordinated and mutually reinforcing. According to a recent report published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, quote, China is conducting an increasingly active and aggressive campaign to penetrate a wide range of U.S. academic institutions, companies, government agencies, and non-governmental organizations. The scale of China's actions in the United States is unparalleled. The report also cited, tellingly, one senior FBI official who told the authors, quote here again, the system is blinking red right now. We have not seen this level of Chinese intelligence and influence activity in and around the U.S. homeland ever. In the 2023 annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community released by OVNI, 2023, in a section on the malign influence operations, both Beijing largely concentrates U.S.-focused influence efforts on shaping U.S. policy and the U.S. public perception of China in a positive direction, but has shown a willingness to meddle in select election races that involve perceived anti-China politicians. So we could not be here at a more timely point. And to just provide 2 more exclamation points, according to facts uncovered by investigative reporting and cyber forensics analysis, Chinese state-affiliated public relation firms have hired unwitting American freelance content creators to stage fake demonstrations in the United States and amplify PRC propaganda. Separate case, Microsoft has identified a sophisticated campaign utilizing artificial intelligence to generate viral content on social media that is getting more difficult for regular users to discern and identify, thereby getting more traction and amplification in the media space. According to Clint Watts, the general manager of the Microsoft Threat Analysis Center, we have observed China-affiliated actors leveraging AI-generated visual media in a broad campaign that largely focuses on political divisive topics such as gun violence, denigrating U.S. political figures and symbols. For Taiwan, the United States, and other democracies around the world, these authoritarian influence operations represent a critical challenge. More than ever, a unified and coordinated response is necessary. What can the world learn from Taiwan's ongoing efforts to combat foreign malign influence? How can democracies better cooperate to enhance the collective resilience against CCP and Russian political warfare? What sorts of narratives are the most effective in countering authoritarian disinformation? I'm truly delighted to be able to assemble this really august and superb experts on the panel today. We'll confront these questions and more with the goal, I hope, at the end of it, of providing some recommendations for Taiwan and the United States as they enter a potentially momentous political year. And just to briefly introduce the superb panelists that we have here today, my immediate left, my colleague, Deputy Director, John Dotson. John is a former U.S. Navy officer and professional staff member of the China Economic and Security Review Commission, among many other postings that he has had, both in government and the private sector. To his left, we have Dr. Yizhong Lai, who is the president of the Prospect Foundation, a Taiwan-based think tank, and has held very numerous prominent positions, both within the Democratic Progressive Party, as well as in government as well. To his left, we have Mr. Yang Fong-Sun, who is a researcher at the Taiwan Information Environment Research Center, or Inform IORG, and a co-founder of U.S. Taiwan Watch and advisor to the Foundation for Future Generations. Last but not least, and at the far left is Craig Simbel, who is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, where he analyzes great power competition with China, and previously spent more than a decade serving in a series of national security roles within the U.S. government, where he primarily focused on East Asia. So I've asked each of our panelists to provide an opening framing comments. Then after each of them speak, it will be followed by a moderated discussion. We do want to hear from you, our audience members, and I'm very pleased to see that we have such a full crowd here today. So we'll reserve around 15 minutes at the end to take audience Q&A and engagement. So please start thinking about your questions now. So Craig, I want to start off with you and have you kick things off and give us a sort of a set the scene for us.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. Thanks for including me today in today's panel. We're living in an age where battles are not just fought on land, sea, and in the air. They're increasingly fought in the political and information realms. Taiwan really does stand out as a testing ground, and really an incubator for what I think China is doing as it hones its political warfare techniques. And from Taiwan, we end up seeing these same capabilities exported worldwide, even if some of the messaging tends to be a little different. At its core, I think Russell sort of touched on this really well. Beijing's political warfare strategy arises from a competition of systems, democracy and autocracy. They're not solely about shaping narratives. They're increasingly about undermining democratic governance around the world. And so today, Beijing is pioneering all of these new methods of influence and control, specifically designed to achieve these desired political outcomes and to make the world less safe for democracy. And this approach is really multifaceted. The strategies that Beijing's employing in the information domain are not arbitrary. They are not haphazard. Increasingly, they are just meticulously crafted to further political outcomes that are favorable to the CCP's long-term interests. Their tactics include everything from propaganda and disinformation to rigorous censorship, and even the strategic capture of foreign elites to influence decisions at the highest levels abroad. They also touch upon cyber operations and I think economic coercion, which all form this broader umbrella of the sort of the tactic of suite of tools that they're using in terms of political warfare. And these efforts, they all aim to skew the global political landscape and to lead nations into choices that align with the CCP's objectives. And as you dive deeper, you'll see that Beijing is investing billions of dollars annually in efforts to portray the PRC and the CCP positively and seeking to sort of influence those broader global perceptions. Part and parcel with that is suppressing contradictory information. So especially on topics like Taiwan, human rights, South China Sea, suppressing those topics is essential to maintaining a facade that suits Beijing's political goals. Part of that, of course, I think in the hacking space is something that we are starting to see the investments of billions of dollars in hacking teams and Chinese netizens to advance those broader objectives. Beyond just the content manipulation, we really do have to take into account China's preference for digital authoritarianism as a means to achieve these desired political outcomes. So they are leveraging this increasingly complex digital architecture to curb the freedom of expression, to suppress independent news, and to spread misinformation. And all of that, right, once again, is designed to craft a political environment that is favorable to China's long-term objectives. And so it's about more than narratives. It's about molding this global ecosystem that is sympathetic and conducive to Beijing's political ambitions. Radio, television, print media, increasingly online and social media, these are all new frontiers for China as it sort of assesses the landscape and assesses sort of opportunity space. And increasingly, we're seeing operations conducted not in Chinese, but in host government languages and in other languages that can become amplifying and self-reinforcing. In Taiwan, I think what we're really seeing is the merging of political with military. The recent military exercises designed to have a very clear intent on the political dynamic before the 2024 election. It's possible we'll see that manifest itself in other parts of the world as China's military presence expands beyond East Asia. The implications, at least from my perspective, on global governance are pretty serious. The ultimate goal, I think, big picture, broad brush, at least from my view, and I think this is borne out in a lot of the sort of the interesting documents that have leaked about how China's United Front operates and the sort of the broader CCP propaganda apparatus, is to create this world, right, where Beijing's political brand of authoritarianism finds more acceptance. And democracies find it harder to flourish and to defend themselves. And that was on display during the recent Belt and Road Forum. If you go back and you read, I encourage everyone to read Xi Jinping's remarks at the opening, where he talks about a new world order that reflects China's values and interests, one that's safer for alternative views on human rights, on broader universal values, and in attendance were representatives from 120 countries. So Xi is not talking to himself, he's talking to a broad and sort of increasingly aligned audience that is finding common ideological cause in confronting current Western order. The hidden dangers, right, then, are more than just this innocuous content. And I'm really excited to sort of hear some of the latest and greatest that my colleagues here have uncovered in Taiwan, because sometimes it looks ham-fisted and sometimes it looks really sophisticated. And I think we'd all agree it's getting more and more difficult to discern, is this disinformation or is this organic content? You know, the sponsored articles, the Beijing-aligned influencers, the strategic media investments, those can all subtly influence political and I would say public perception, nudging populations towards political outcomes that Beijing desires. And that's true in Taiwan, just as it's true in other places as far-flung as Tanzania. They are increasingly getting help and assistance from like-minded partners, Russia being, I think, their premier partner in their space, not just amplifying each other's disinformation, but building self-reinforcing networks that can amplify new themes that are increasingly aligned with this new global order that China and I think Russia as a secondary partner are amplifying. So understanding that endgame is so vital. Each of these narrative and disinformation campaigns, right, are tied to those political outcomes, whether they have to do with territorial claims, economic dominance, political loyalty. And so there is a method to the madness. Some of those goals, right, are undermining the legitimacy and the influence of democratic institutions globally, creating a sphere of influence where nations are economically, politically, and even militarily dependent on China, shaping global narratives to support Beijing's territorial claims over Taiwan, South China Sea. And then I think the most sort of concerning that I'm seeing is sowing discord among democratic alliances to weaken and I think to weaken the united front, to borrow a phrase, against PRC objectives. So the future landscape, what are we looking at here? This is all pretty dour, I think. As we learn more and we study more, I think we're starting to walk away with a sort of all the red alarms are sort of lighting up everywhere as we start to look at this. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the fabric of global political discourse is at stake here simply because of the means and the capability and the intent that the Chinese have deployed against this target set. Increasingly, I think countries will find themselves caught in webs of disinformation where public opinions are swayed and political decisions are influenced without people even realizing the source of the manipulation, which is sort of like the next level that I think we're going to be confronting here soon. But of course, this is not a one-sided battle. Democracies have some pretty unique strengths. The value we place on transparency, truth, individual freedom. And I think increasingly we have to ask ourselves how we are going to leverage those principles, how we're going to arm ourselves to be better aware, and how we're going to sort of cultivate an informed and discerning public. I think learning from the lessons that are being learned every day on the ground in Taiwan, the lessons learned, good and bad, are going to really help inform the United States and like-minded countries to strengthen and harden their defenses as we start to confront what is very clearly, I think, already manifesting here in the United States, but other countries around the world. And so those collaborative efforts between nations, tighter regulations on digital content dissemination, and most importantly, educating our populations about the subtle nuances of these disinformation campaigns are vital, and they are areas where we are not currently investing sufficient resources. I just want to wrap up there and say that obviously, if Taiwan is ground zero, what we're learning there is going to have a demonstrable impact on what we are seeing here in the United States. There are a number of very important global elections coming up in the next few years. So I'm really excited to hear about what my colleagues have been uncovering in Taiwan, because I think we will lay the groundwork for what's ahead.
Thank you so much, Craig. That was excellent in terms of setting the scene, in terms of the scope, the nature, the targets of CCP political warfare. And since our discussion here today is focused on also timely application of CCP warfare and with regards to the upcoming elections in Taiwan and the United States, I want to turn now to Ethan Lai to set the stage for us in terms of Taiwan's upcoming presidential and legislative elections and what's at stake there.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here and to attend this very timely and important symposium here at the GTI. The topic I'm assigned to talk about is basically one of the most powerful one. Which everyone knows that next year we're going to have the major president election as well as the UI elections in the same day. And I have to say that in a nutshell, it is the UI election that determine the dynamics of the presidential election, and not the other way around. So that is the very, very important the background that I believe a lot of people need to pay attention to. Just as the next year Taiwan will enter the so-called post-Tsai-Ing-wen era, that we're going to have a new president, and right now we have probably four candidates vying for the elections. Terry Guo, he tried to get enough signatures for him to register as a candidate, and he's trying, but already I think earlier this week that he was under the investigation by, the function was under investigation by China, and that took a hit about the rhetoric war. But the other two candidates outside of the ruling parties, KMT push out the Hou Youyi, and the TPP push out the current who is the former Taipei City mayor. Both of them they are entering the race. And of course, a lot of people would like to see that the political drama, how that will evolve, especially whether the two major opposition party figures, Cohen representing the TPP and the Hou Youyi representing KMT, would they come out on the same ticket? This is where I said that the election dynamics will enter the race, to determine how the people's calculation regarding president campaign politics. Although you look at the opinion poll, that both Cohen and the Hou Youyi, none of them they could be ahead of the poll. And William Lai, the current candidate of the ruling party, is very comfortably ahead of both of them by double digits. And the talk about the coalition among the Cohens and Hou Youyi, KMT and TPP, is in the talk. But if you look at from the Cohens, his point of view, what they actually look at is actually is about that in the post-election scenario on the AOI result. It is expected that none of the major party, the KMT, DPP, and the Taiwan People's Party, will be able to master the majority by themselves in the AOI. So that gave the Cohens the anticipation that in the post-AOI election scenario, that the Cohens, if his DPP party can score enough seats in the AOI, then they'll make it that the Cohens party could be the kingmaker to decide to determine which party will be the majority in the AOI. If the Cohens are committed too early with the KMT, not only the Cohens party will lose the opportunity of the possible post-election shakeup by working with the DPP and should the William Lai win the elections to score some the parliamentary seats as well as the possible vice speaker of the possibility. But also the Cohens, should he already forming a ticket with the KMT, then the issue about how to fill the candidate in the AOI will become the very next very contentious issue right now. So the best way seems to be for the Cohens is that he will enter the race and continue all the way to the end. On one hand, that by having this race in the presidential election, it will enhance the seats for his party in the AOI. So that will improve and increase the opportunity that in the post-elections, post-AOI election scenario, that his party will play the role of kingmaker, as well as the possibility to work with either one of them, the KMT or the DPP, in the post-election shakeup. And by doing that, the Cohens also need to work out the scenario where not only Cohens need to cooperate, get Guo Taiming in his camp in order to force the KMT supporters with anticipation that probably Cohens is in upstream, so that the KMT would no longer have the opportunity to win the presidential elections, and so that a good number of the KMT supporters will start for the strategic voting behavior and vote for the Cohens, and then Cohens might, through that scenario, have the opportunity to score a surprising defeat against the Lai Ching-te. So those calculations, when we look at it, is actually, in my view, determining how the dynamics about whether there's a joint ticket or not, and how's the calculation within the Cohens itself. But on the other hand, the KMT as a party, although their candidate is in opinion polls like in the number 3, But for the KMT to be the party in the VP seats, that will also speak about the further split within the KMT after the election, or even in the process. Because it will result to many KMT members that look at the KMT as a party that probably won't be able to have any political decisions, even with a current become their president, so that they will either defect to the current TPP party, or they studied their allegiance with the KMT will decline. And so that is another calculation that KMT, they cannot, in my view, they cannot become the number two in the ticket. And so that is how the calculation of the current and the KMT, the dynamics actually would prevent them from the joint from forming a joint ticket. So this is how I see the election dynamic that is going on right now. And about whether we are going to have the KMT, the TPP joint ticket or not. And I would say that the AOY election itself is something that it's scores significant in the calculations, especially on the colleges. And to a certain extent, when we look at the post-election scenario, should the William Lai win the election, and probably you're going to see the repeat of the scenarios of the Chen Shui-bian's electoral victory in the year 2000, where the DPP wins the presidential election, but did not have the majority. But whether the DPP will be the opposition in the AOY election, in the AOY competitions, that really depends on the post-election scenario, where the alliances, which side that the Conservative Party decided to ally with. Because it seems to, according to all the opinion polls, seem to indicate that TPP probably will get at maximum 50-some, but never the majority. And the KMT will score 40-some, and probably a 40, I do not know exactly. And the Conservative Party will have a good outcome, probably around 10 or even the 10 plus. So that is the, and that development will favor the Conservative and to let the party to get here. And then I'll just talk, and next thing, I'll talk about this discussion in the elections, what we see, especially in the cross relationship. We do know that the KMT and the opposition party like to turn this election as this is the choice between the war and peace. You choose DPP, you choose war, and you choose opposition, you choose peace. And the Chinese behavior also would like to reinforce this impression. But then a very interesting dynamics that happened in this election is that traditionally, when the Taiwan-China relation factored into the president elections, the usual dichotomy has been the China represent economic opportunity, and if you want economic opportunity, then you need to sacrifice some of your sovereignty and even your relationship and security cooperation with the United States, and vice versa. But precisely due to the Chinese economic downturn, and precisely due to our Taiwan businessmen, their experience in China in the last several years, what we do see is that the big number of the Taiwan businessmen, they started to get out of China, or they want to lower their footprint in China in terms of their global investment portfolio. The discussions about the cross relationship is no longer China represent the economic opportunity, and the United States or Taiwan, you wanted to have your state security, then probably you have to earn less money. The dynamics is no longer like that, and that actually get into the how the people's reaction to a certain Chinese economic sanction against Taiwan. So that I think since year 2021, China started to have all kind of different economic sanctions against Taiwan, and also some organizations, including Prospect Foundation, we also have the Chinese nationalists, including me, yes. So But if you look at the Taiwan society's reaction toward the economic sanction by China, the reaction is, well, they're irritated, but that they are not that much of the concern. Irritated because, well, why are you doing this to us? But are they so much worried about those? Probably not as much. So that also represents the phenomenon that the Chinese economic portfolio or the influence in Taiwan in comparison with what it was like in year 2020 or year 2016 is going to reduce. And I think for China to really push forward the development, the advancement about unifications, but with a less tool they can use through the economic coercion or the sanction efforts, that the force China to resort to more on the military front. So coercion, military coercion, a hard economic sanction and military threat that have become more and more obvious in this election. That's how we're seeing that this development. And of course, right now we look at the Chinese military coercion against Taiwan. Especially after the Nancy Pelosi visit last year, August. But what we started to see is that traditionally Chinese military activity threatening Taiwan, they either correspond to a certain political event in either United States or Taiwan, or they correspond to a certain U.S. military or paramilitary postures around that area at the similar time. But right now, we're starting to see the uptake of the Chinese military activities on Taiwan is no longer as a part of the political signals, but it basically, many of them as a pattern of the exercise in military operation on Taiwan. So that's the classic differences that the people need to pay attention to. And that also translate to the kind of serious planning that China on Taiwan on the military front. That's something that we just cannot ignore. Although we still look at the capability that the military invasion by China on Taiwan right now, they will fail. The military invasion is neither inevitable or the imminent. That statement still is true. But apparently the military uptick on Taiwan, the threat, is definitely something that we never see in the past, and it's very threatening. But this ended with that.
Thank you so much, Yizong, for really sobering remarks there. I think you really provided a clinical, sort of political analysis of the electoral dynamics leading up to the elections, and I think that's really helpful in relevance to the broader topic at hand, which is CCP political warfare, is that it is often directed at exacerbating those political fissures and social divisions within a society. And so I think what you provided is sort of those fault lines that exist right now, and that that perhaps in some ways could guide how the PRC is attempting to influence Taiwan's upcoming election. I was struck by your mentioning of the announcement of those investigations of what the potential candidates, Terry Kuo's amount of assets that he has and the Foxconn's asset in the PRC, and it's very curious in terms of its timing. Why it was announced now that he is a potentially presidential candidate, and despite his sort of pro-Beijing policy preferences just happening, it is. I can't imagine the PRC doing this simply without any consideration of the electoral dynamics within Taiwan. And it strikes me that, given his candidacy, he does split the opposition's votes. I'm sure the Beijing authorities couldn't be happy with the fact that his candidacy, in fact, lessens the likelihood, that the opposition could win, and perhaps may have been one of the motivating factors that they would have decided, at this point to investigate Foxconn's large assets. His longstanding presence there, and And it just goes to the fact that, I think, that this is, that these measures are very calculating and these things just don't happen, not without a sort of a reason of this being. And I think that's, give a lot of us, for us to think about right now in terms of, how was upcoming elections as well, and how gives me the attention to shape that. So I want to zoom in. Let's see. Let's zoom in now a bit and focus on the information operations side in terms of what the PRC is, is specifically doing. So I want to turn it over to you, Wang Xuan. Yeah.
Thank you. So for inviting me to this great event and to raise awareness about Chinese political warfare, Taiwan, and of course I'm from Taiwan Information Environment Research Center. And I just remember throughout our discussion, I remember there was one time when we do some field work in a very rural place in Taiwan, and there's this lady all really agrees that this information is problematic to Taiwan's democracy. And then I asked her, so what is the biggest issue about this information? Is that about Taiwanese doubts about U.S. commitment? She said, no. The biggest problem for me is the fraud phone call I got. And that's very problematic. So I would not exaggerate her representativeness of a general population in Taiwan. But my point is that in Taiwan, people have different priorities or issues they care about. So maybe perhaps sometimes people may find that the voting behavior of Taiwanese voters may not be that consistent. Sometimes, especially when there is a military coercion or economic coercion, and people may say that, oh, or perhaps perhaps the result will favor one party or another. But it's not always the case. Sometimes it's about economy, sometimes about shortage of electricity or water or even eggs, which is a big issue in Taiwan sometimes, or before during the pandemic, it's maybe about vaccines, and people have grievances about that. It's not always about foreign policy. That's one thing. So that's the information environment we're seeing in Taiwan. And just like Dr. Lai talked about, we see pretty much we see POA aircraft intrusion in Taiwan's ADIZ pretty much on a daily basis, and a lot of intimidations like activities like military exercises around Taiwan every time. Since the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visits Taiwan. And then we see that that also happened when President Tsai visits here, meeting former Speaker Karen McCarthy. And then Vice President Lai was here, and also there's like an exercise around Taiwan. So it became a routine, and which was unthinkable a few years ago. And also, just like Russell talked about, there are some economic coercion, especially if people are talking about Foxconn, like basically some past audits in China, and of course a lot of bans and sanctions of Taiwan's agricultural products. But still, just like Dr. Lai said, that people are more irritated rather than intimidated. So I won't downplay that the spreads or problem it caused. But also we need to look at other side to China intend to not only to make Taiwanese people fear China, but to change the narrative to hate Taiwanese itself and Taiwan's allies. So that's why we are talking about skepticism about the United States commitment to Taiwan. And of course, sometimes we look at some cases is focused on highlighting Taiwanese government's incapability to deal with issues. For example, we may see that major events like for example, the outbreak of Russia-Ukraine war, and now recently there's a conflict between Israel and Hamas. But we always see that, and there's a rumor saying that Taiwanese people they wish to evacuate from this country and from Ukraine and Israel, and Taiwanese government is so unable to help these people overseas to evacuate, and only the Chinese and embassies to do that, and that's not true. But still, we may see that there's a case and which is very interesting. And there is a Taiwanese living in China, and he pretended to be a Taiwanese living in Ukraine and complaining about the Chinese government's incapability to help it out, and that's disinformation. And we can see that more and more we see less and less we see the direct line of command from this we used to call central kitchen from the Chinese propaganda. Yeah, just like a food, serve you food and all the dishes, and then we may imagine that there's a propaganda apparatus, and they cook the foods, and then they have all the media outlets to help spread this disinformation. But now we see that more and more is by collaborators. You don't see that first coming from let's say Global Times. Maybe you sometimes you may see that first coming out of Chinese media outlets. There are even some cases like just this year. There's one radio host here based in Washington, Gordon Nixon. He tweeted about President Biden has a plan to destroy Ukraine, and then the next will be Taiwan. And definitely we are not sure if it's directly related to Chinese Communist Party or propaganda apparatus, and also we see a lot of disinformation surrounding just like Ambassador Robert O'Brien, and there's a rumor saying that he's talked about the destruction of Taiwan, which is like a twisted information of this real word. He talked about something related to that issue, but that information was twisted, and also or perhaps the hauling out of Taiwan by so-called forcing the TSMC investment in Arizona, or destruction of TSMC. I believe that's from Representative Seth Moulton, and his words is also kind of twisted, trying to highlight the narratives, saying that the U.S. will eventually abandon Taiwan, not only abandon Taiwan, but also destroy Taiwan. So just like my colleague Liu Zhihao, also from IORG, he was here last month, I believe. He talked about our latest report on the skepticism about U.S. commitment to Taiwan. We can see that over time, perhaps one or two, back in 2021, when the U.S. retreated from Afghanistan, we see a lot of narratives focusing, highlighting the U.S. abandonment of Taiwan. And then when the TSMC investment in Arizona settled down, and there's a so-called hollowing out narratives. And of course, we see that there can be so-called bargaining chip narratives after the Russia-Ukraine war really broke out. And what's concerning to us is that before the outbreak of Russia-Ukraine war, the Chinese people's confidence about the U.S. support or commitment to Taiwan defense was around 40 to 60. It fluctuated over time, but it's about that range. But right after the outbreak, I believe that's March that year, it dropped sharply to somewhere like 30%. And that's even after President Biden already talked about his commitment to Taiwan's defense 1 or 2 times. And that number is just it has risen back again recently. But that's really concerning. So so Taiwanese people will look at and then we see that is so Chinese narratives they may be based on certain level of truths, but it will twist again twist for in favor of its narrative to show that Taiwanese government's capability or Taiwan's democracy is chaotic, is not efficient, and the U.S. commitment to Taiwan is weak, is not trustworthy, and so I guess that there's some as people may know this, there's some paradox over there. So as you can see, just like the lady I talked about, yeah, people think that foreign policy matters. People have other priorities, and second, Taiwanese people do love America, and as all these surveys over time have shown that Taiwanese people favor U.S. over China, but still sometimes it can be affected by outside events like Russia-Ukraine war. And I remember there's academia Sinica survey last year showing that still a majority of Taiwanese people doesn't really trust U.S. I wish that kind of percentage just maybe a little bit change. So I guess that's pretty much it.
Thanks very much, Walter. I think it was very helpful. You laid out the various threads of narratives that that PRC is pushing, in Taiwan. The thread that I'm hearing from both Yizhong and your comments is that is that the effectiveness of PRC information and disinformation operations within Taiwan appears to be lessening, right? The effectiveness of these, but then as a result of this, they appear to be turning into other tools of political warfare, and namely, I think the most worrisome, I think, from Dr. Lai's comments were is the use of these, military operations that are no longer simply for political signaling, based on your assessment, but actual preparations, perhaps, for kinetic operations, and that line is increasingly blurred, and that makes it planning and countering such activities all the more complex. And I do hope that in the course of our discussions, with the moderating discussion, that we could also maybe touch upon these various elements of political warfare, right? The cyber component is interesting. But we've also touched on the economic, but more so in terms of just kind of teeing up a question for you, but where do you see the sort of the evolution of PRC gray zone operations sort of shifting now that it is now that you see this sort of trend that they are relying on this more as in its attempt to shape Taiwan's political discourse, and so maybe some of your observations of recent trends in that regard would be helpful. So last but not least, I want to turn it over to my colleague John, who's actually published a very lengthy study at GTI about this American skepticism theory that Guangchen had referenced earlier. But more for the purpose of today's discussion, though, that he's going to be focusing on looking at the convergences of Chinese and Russian propaganda and disinformation efforts, and because that is, I think, a fairly newer trend that we are seeing that I think warrants greater attention. So, John, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Russell. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. From some of the other speakers, I think we've heard some sort of broader sort of macro discussions of some of this. And I guess for my own presentation, I wanted to do something a little bit different to give a presentation that would be a little more specific, in particular a case study of what I identify as a particular Chinese Communist Party information operation directed at Taiwan, and specifically one that emerged this summer in regards to biological warfare disinformation in Taiwan. Go to the next slide. So what was the story? Well, in July, the Lian Hebao, or United Daily News, one of Taiwan's major newspapers, and one pretty clearly aligned with the Pan-Blue portion of Taiwan's political spectrum, and a paper that I think has been subject to, whether one views it as being fair or unfair, of some criticisms of being sort of influenced by pro-PRC messaging or propaganda or interest, I should say. But anyway, on July 9th, the Hebao first published an article, and on the right side of the screen, you can see sort of the online headline for that. But it was a story in which the article alleged that Taiwan's government, current government, DPP-led government, was involved in plans to create a new sort of P4 level or biosecurity level for P4 laboratory in Taiwan for the specific purpose of biological warfare research, and that this was being done at U.S. direction. And it was a little bit unclear, but along with this story was sort of the assertion that this new lab was going to be sort of created in an expanded existing Ministry of Defense medical facility that existed in the Sanxiao region of Taipei. 3 days later, on July 12th, the same paper, Lian Hebao, then published what it asserted was the underlying source document for this. Like, we gave you the article before, and now here's where all this comes from. And the source document, which you can see in the headline on the lower portion of the screen, was supposedly, actually, you could go ahead and go to the next slide, Marshall. The source document purported to be the minutes of a July 2022 sort of secret meeting of a government organization called the South Sea Working Committee, which doesn't appear to actually exist. It's sort of a strange, vague name. And it's not entirely clear from the document like what the institutional subordination of this organization is supposed to be. On the document, it does list as its chairman former Premier Su Zhenchang, which would seem to place it maybe in the executive yuan, one assumes. But again, there's no known organization like this that actually exists in Taiwan's government, unless this is a sort of secret Illuminati type organization that we've never heard of before. But anyway, in the Lian Hebao article on July 12th, they published this document, which has text that relates to a number of different topics, but has 2 blocks of text in it that pertain to these supposed plans to create a biological warfare laboratory, again, at U.S. direction. And you can see the translation of those 2 blocks of text there. I'll just read them quickly. In compliance with American demands that we conduct research and development into biological warfare, we plan to install a new biological safety level 4 laboratory. This department has already completed the plan. The American side will dispatch personnel to assist with examining the plan. You can see the Americans are in the supervisory role in all this. If there are opinions regarding points that are insufficient or in need of revision, this department will implement management control. And then a little bit later in the document, there's a second block of text. The construction of a level 4 biological laboratory and the development of UAVs, so interesting, are American requirements. The president regards this matter seriously and requests the Ministry of National Defense to control the schedule of implementation and so forth. Go to the next slide, please. There are a number of things about this source document that are a little bit odd, to put it politely. Starting with the fact that, again, there's no known organization of the South Sea Working Committee known to actually exist. A number of civil society organizations in Taiwan that look at disinformation, such as our colleagues here with the IORG. A number of these civil society organizations looked at this and identified a number of these discrepancies. A couple of examples I put on the screen that were identified by an organization called the Asia Fact Check Lab. They pointed out rather some linguistic discrepancies in the document, some areas where the text seemed to indicate, or the Mandarin in the document aligned more with PRC Mandarin rather than Mandarin as spoken or written in Taiwan. It would look odd in an American document if there are references to lorries or things like that. I think it's sort of a similar sort of thing. Interestingly, they also identified part of this source document that appeared to be plagiarized from an earlier Lian Bao article. I thought was entertaining. There are a few things that I wanted to point out that occurred to me as I was reading through that document. One is that just sort of curiously how the whoever it is that was the anonymous person taking the minutes of this meeting seemed to almost proudly or eagerly describe themselves as being American lackeys in a way that seems odd for someone actually taking real minute notes. But I think really one of the key giveaways and linguistic oddities in the document is the repeated use of the term "our party," "bandang." And I give you some examples there on the screen, the popular views of our party, government's issues facing our party. My personal favorite is a part of the document where they refer to party member comrades, and their need to maintain secrecy. If that sounds a little odd to you, I think you don't need to be a native speaker of Chinese for that to be flagged for you as being odd. It doesn't really make sense in terms of, I think, people in a Taiwan government meeting. It makes a lot of sense, though, if you had a person who had spent their life in the insular bureaucracy of the Chinese Communist Party and in that institutional culture that was trying to imagine the language employed in one of these meetings. And to me, it seems a pretty clear example of mirror imaging. Again, I think by an insular bureaucrat or bureaucrats somewhere from within either the CCP propaganda bureaucracy or an intelligence service, perhaps the Ministry of State Security. I don't quite know the answer on that. But I will assert that the document shows, I think, very clear fingerprints of being a CCP fabrication. Could you go to the next slide, please? Along with this, in an example of, again, what appears to be a broader campaign of coordinated disinformation, the following month in Taiwan, in August, there were a series of apparently coordinated social media posts, many of them were on Facebook, that promoted the story in conjunction with this supposed new biological warfare lab. That at American direction, again, Taiwanese government officials had been directed to gather together a large number of blood samples from Taiwan residents for the purpose of genetic warfare research directed at China. And a specific component of this story, or one sort of specific allegation within it, was that Academia Sinica, the sort of Taiwan government, both hard science and social science research organization, the scholarly organization had been tasked with collecting 150,000 blood samples from Taipei General Veterans Hospital. Once again, fact-checking organizations in Taiwan looked at this and very quickly declared these to be fake postings, often done by fake accounts, and so on and so forth. Let's go to the next slide, please. On the other side of the Taiwan Strait, also during the summer, this story was actively picked up and promoted in PRC state media as well. I just wanted to provide you with a couple examples here. On the left side, that's an online headline from a PRC newspaper. And on the image you see on the right is an online news video I found, again, PRC produced, that was buttressing the story and specifically sort of laying out the accusations about how a secret line of funding from AIT, the American Institute in Taiwan, was going into the construction of this secret biological warfare laboratory. And what I wanted to point out here is, to me, this illustrates, what I call seeding and citing, which is a common tactic you can see used in PRC propaganda and PRC disinformation. They will seed a story in the local media environment, in this case, through the document that was placed with the Lian Hebao. Then, in their own media, they will point to that as the source of the controversy and comment on it and try to promote it and expand it. I sometimes also call this propaganda laundering when it's done through a local proxy. This has a long history in Soviet disinformation tactics. One of the things that this reminds me of is that the KGB carried out a very successful disinformation campaign in the mid to late 90s to spread the story that the AIDS virus was a U.S. biological warfare weapon that had been developed at the U.S. Army facility in Fort Detrick, Maryland. And the Soviets followed this practice there. They seeded the story in an Indian newspaper, and then publications in the Soviet Union throughout the Eastern Bloc then pointed to that, hey, this Indian paper has done this expose on how the AIDS virus came out of Fort Detrick. It's an American biological warfare weapon. So it's a very old tactic, but one that we're seeing revived for PRC disinformation now. Could you go to the next one? This also connects, I argue, to something that's seen over the last 18 months or so, and Russell made brief mention of this earlier, where we see sort of Russian and Chinese state propaganda or disinformation coordination. In the spring of last year, following the invasion of Ukraine, Russian state agencies began producing a disinformation story that there were secret US-funded biological warfare laboratories in Ukraine. And they cited this as another justification for the invasion. According to the Russian disinformation stories, these secret, again, sort of US-Ukraine collaboration biological warfare laboratories had produced a number of diseases that had been spread into Russian territory. My favorite specific example was the assertion that these labs had produced a specific sort of resistant strain of tuberculosis, which had been implanted in counterfeit banknotes, which were then disseminated to children in the region of Luhansk, a part of like Russian-occupied Ukraine. There were a few others, but that was my personal favorite. This story was picked up and amplified and promoted by Chinese state media as well, that you can see in the example image on the right. And I will also note, I mean, you can kind of, at first blush, kind of laugh at some of this and say, who would actually believe this? I think it actually gets more traction than you might think. And here in America, this particular story, the one about the secret US-funded biowarfare labs in Ukraine, was, for example, picked up by Tucker Carlson and promoted on the evening lineup of his show on Fox News. So it gets wider traction than you might think. Could you go to the next slide? Just a few concluding thoughts. Again, I think, while it's only one particular example, I think this biological warfare labs in Taiwan story is an illuminating example of a CCP disinformation operation, and everything about it, I think, I would argue, totally bears those hallmarks. There's a few sort of comments or takeaways I wanted to note in conjunction with that. One is that I think it demonstrates the prominent role of proxy media outlets, either, depending on how you look at it, either manipulated or willfully manipulated or knowingly manipulated proxy media outlets in Taiwan. Persons and organizations that are willing, for whatever the motivation might be, whether it's financial, whether it's political, to promote these stories, or to sort of to act as if they are the sort of original source or originator of these PRC manufactured disinformation stories. The second takeaway that occurred to me is I think this particular example demonstrates a more brazen willingness by the CCP to embrace sort of old school Soviet active measures, disinformation techniques. Of course, the CCP has done this for quite some time. I would argue it seems like they're sort of becoming a little more brazen in doing it. I think it also the content of this particular conspiracy theory or disinformation story. I think it also demonstrates the continued importance that the CCP places on promoting this America skepticism theory, that and in trying to manipulate public opinion to try to drive a wedge between the United States and Taiwan, as well as trying to foster narratives that will influence the upcoming elections against the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. And finally, for my last takeaway, again, you can almost chuckle at how crude some of this disinformation material is in some ways. And I think it illustrates a difficulty that a very insular CCP bureaucracy sometimes has in stepping outside of its own bubble to produce effective disinformation material. But I think they will probably be getting better at it, as Mr. Young noted. And I think it also raises the question, well, a lot of this may be crude, but does that really matter? Very crude disinformation material can still have an impact. I think it was Mark Twain who said that a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can get its pants on. If you get a narrative out and you reinforce it, and people will hear it second, third hand, it can sort of seep into collective consciousness by the time that fact checkers come along behind it and say, no, this is fake, fake, fake. It can still have a impact. So in the interest of time, I think I'll leave it there and we'll let you go to Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John, for that deep dive. I think we've known for many years now that the Russians and the Chinese have signed a number of these propaganda, sharing agreements. But I think what we're starting to see now, to some extent, is that maybe they are, sharing, the tactics, techniques, and procedures in terms of their propaganda and disinformation operations. And I think this case study provides some useful insights about, how those are cross-pollinating there, and I suspect that we're going to see more and more of that. And so here at GTI, we will continue to monitor these developments and ensure them as warranted. Now, I know we have a very full audience here, so I do want to make sure we do get to your questions. And I just want to remind our online viewers too that we would like to hear from you. So if you would like to ask a question, you may do so by sending an email to contact@Global Taiwan, or you can tweet us as well at Global Taiwan. Just to kick off the discussion, I'm just going to reserve myself to one question, and I'm going to turn it over to the audience. And so I want you guys to start thinking about what your questions are. But really, because I think we've done a lot here now to sort of identify what these types of political warfare activities are, and what the world can learn in terms of the types of actions being taken by the PRC to affect Taiwan's democracies. But I'd like to focus our Q&A here on what can democracies do to better cooperate and enhance their collective resilience against CCP and also now Russian political warfare. So if I may, I'm just going to start with you, Craig, actually, since we had you start off with the presentations, and have you sort of address it. I'm posing this to the entire panel. So please take it away, Craig.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, just some top lines for me. We're at the point now where I think there's broad acceptance that these things are occurring and that they are occurring at scale, which achieving that sort of broad consensus is usually the first hurdle. And then the question becomes, with the limited resource portfolio, both in the government and in the outside, finding the sweet spot in that public-private partnership. And so what's increasingly clear is that the parts of the US government that are tasked with analyzing and amplifying, sort of making known through awareness campaigns that these things are occurring is incredibly small. I'd encourage everyone to look at a recent Global Engagement Center GEC report that the State Department produced, sort of the first ever that they've done that's comprehensively looks at this challenge. And then you could quickly go look at what the GEC's budget and personnel is, and you'll see that it's about 15 people. So while China employs $6 billion annually on these campaigns, and in theory, potentially millions of netizens and also state-backed and state-directed individuals, we're doing this with 20 people in a single office in the State Department. So we're obviously, there's a huge disparity between how we are doing this from the government perspective, both in these small niche offices. But to your point, I would just highlight that during the Cold War, there was a specific office at the National Security Council tasked with confronting active measures. It's something John and I have talked about a little bit. We lost some of the muscle memory that we had during the Cold War, and even though some of the capabilities are different and the tactics and platforms are different, there is muscle memory in the United States for thinking through and fighting and adjudicating and identifying some of these things. So I think there's both structural changes that are necessary, but also a broad recognition that the current resources applied to it are in no way, shape, or form sort of representative of the threat. And once you get there, I think Congress can start to move in certain ways to plus up budgets and create lots of directives on the executive branch. But it should, in theory, be done with partnership between those two branches in concert with the private sector, who I think is at the tip of the spear in terms of technological development, to quickly and from a scalable perspective identify these campaigns and to make that information public. Finding the balance between all of those different pieces is probably where we find ourselves today, and it's going to be a challenge going forward. Thank you. Walter, you want?
I would say that because in a fight against disinformation, time really matters. And people will get that impression, or as people may call it, anchoring effects. People get that impression really fast. So if you have the fact out, but it's too late, people will have that impression and don't really care about what the fact really is. So I guess I just like put it really nice. It's important only to have more people with more talents tackling this issue, but I would say that public-private synergy also important just like ours us in IORG. Every time there's a disinformation, and we will check with each other and see, like, for example, there's a piece of disinformation when Japan tried to when Japan will let out its water from nuclear plants. I think that's in August. And there's a rumor saying that Prime Minister Kishida he ate like a dish like seafoods, and he got very sick and hospitalized. And then we saw that piece of information, and we are not sure about that. But there's one picture which is clearly fake, because we know that that's from former Prime Minister Abe. Yeah, because he was he was in the process of hospitalization. And so that we try to make sure, we try to confirm with our Japanese partners, and to see that to showing that this is what we see on Twitter, especially in Chinese information environment. And can you confirm for us what's the discussion over there? And or what's the reality? And it seems that it's actually Prime Minister Kishida is really fine, but that piece of information is already went viral on Twitter. But it's important. But I think that's within hours that and the Japanese sides, or the thing is that from private sectors, they already debunked that piece of disinformation. So not only can we do this kind of synergy or cooperation between public and private sectors, but also cross-trade, cross-national cooperation also important. You see that, oh, what's the matter over there again? Because we are even say that we are outnumbered, but it's always better to have more around the world to help us out.
Just very quick, that Taiwan experiences that we have all kind of issues regarding the social platform, especially. Taiwan has no control about those social platform, almost all of them, they are owned by the foreign nations. So that's the capitalism, commercial logic, many times that prevents their cooperation with Taiwan government. And how we wanted them to cooperate with them. Of course, those are the issues about whether we're censoring messages or actually censoring the influence, the spread of those false information, whether that intended or not. So that I will say that despite all the international cooperation that we have and the information exchange, but it goes down to the very fundamental issue, that is to really address the kind of false information coming out. Still, the issue about the social platform owned by other nations, other companies, whether that will be like to cooperate with Taiwan, and even some of the company there, original directors, their political ideology sometimes is really run direct against Taiwan, especially when we talk about the Chinese language. That's really a pain in the ass for us.
Thank you for those candid remarks. You can, okay. Very well. Okay, well, now it's the time for to hear from our audience. So please raise your hand, and when please make sure to wait for the microphone and state your name. Okay, no microphone, but state your name as well as your affiliation, and please direct your questions to, please say who you're directing your questions to. All right, this gentleman right here.
Hi there, thank you so much to GTI and all the panelists. I'm Jonathan Baumel from AEI's Coalition Defense of Taiwan project. I have two brief questions, if I may. One is for Dr. Lai, and the other for Mr. Yang. What do you see as the potential CCP objective for the upcoming Taiwan election? I think last time around, it was relatively clear that they had a preferred candidate, maybe less so this time. And specifically, how might the CCP hope to use the election or an election outcome to advance unification? The 92 consensus is not the same as unification, of course, so how can they actually get to that lofty goal? And then for Mr. Yang, on America's skepticism theory, IORG has done great analysis and very detailed analysis of the different strains of that. Have you seen the US policy of strategic ambiguity show up in any of those narratives, and might that policy play a role in the spreading of those narratives? Thank you.
And I think the CCP objective about this election, the most optimal one definitely is to unseat the DPP. So that's why when we look at the action they want to have, it's actually trying to force opposition to form a joint ticket, and that will maximize the opportunity for them to defeat the William Lai in the presidential elections. And if the presidential election they cannot prevail, the next optimal one will be the force of DPP to close the DPP the majority in the LI, and to foster the opposition for them to have the majority in the LI. And those are the things that I believe that part of the actions and on forcing the ticket is also trying to force the opposition to have a joint cooperation in the LI elections. Probably they will have the better success in this time about the LI. But I have to say that the DPP, and when we talk about the year 2000 and this time, for the DPP have the presidency, but they lost, but did not have the LI majority. The DPP right now is much stronger than it was in year 2000. In year 2000, it was almost barely 1/3 of the LI seats. But this time, although we probably DPP cannot have the majority, but still I believe that the DPP still has a good number and closer to the majority, although probably.
Thank you, Mr. Bong. And it's a very good question in terms of the contribution of U.S. strategic ambiguity to the so-called American skepticism theory. And I believe that there are multiple polls showing that just like what I mentioned after Russia and Ukraine war, people's confidence in U.S. Dropped, and that's after President Biden already committed that already made that commitment, and that's compatible strategic clarity to Taiwan. And also, I believe there are some polls by I think it's by Gallup in 2016, and a survey to the multiple NATO, not only NATO allies, but a lot of countries around the globe, and to check their confidence in U.S. governments. And I believe that only half of them with treaty, half of them, like the U.S. and treaty allies, are very confident, like the majority of them, and the rest of them are not so confident. So it's not like strategic clarity is something like a magic formula to solve all the problems. And I believe that other potential sources of such skepticism maybe about so-called anti-Americanism and a lot of narratives over there. I remember there is one poll in Taiwan, and he asked the same question, something like, "Why do you think that the U.S. will not come for Taiwan's help?" And the top answer is, and over half of them, not really all the half of them, the options that most of the votes is because the U.S. only care about its own interests rather than ours. So that's a very calculated mindset over there. So there are a lot more to check rather than just only strategic view.
Take some questions from this side. Okay, gentleman in the blue.
Hi, I'm Rocco Santori, a contributor for a British Army think tank. There's in a lot of the military circles in the U.S., they've sort of circled the year of 2027. You mentioned some of the Chinese efforts now for military coercion with Taiwan. Do you see this identification by the U.S. as possibly the equivalent of countering that type of military coercion, where they're trying to serve on a date? Do you put in that date in terms of possibilities and disinformation on the side of the United States?
I think maybe that, I think maybe this is a good question for you to take here.
I would say that before the invasion of Ukraine, the year 2027, that's military, probably that more militarily than after the invasion of Ukraine. Right now, we look at the year 2027 more as a political calendar rather than a military calendar. Because year 2007 is the time that Xi Jinping would like to seek for the first term, as well as 1 year anniversary of the PLA establishment. And we do not, and right now China still does not have the capability to have a successful invasion on Taiwan. And although they try to establish probably a force in nuclear, aircraft carriers, and other investment in the Navy, but you need much more than that. The invasion forces and how to not only air the capability, they just do not have those. And also the Taiwan Straits and the geography is a very difficult terrain to counter. Just as for the invasion on the beaches, the rapid tide coming out and blown make the invasion itself very, very difficult. That's the if you miss just like for about 30 minutes, you probably the area you want to land will be pushed about 10 or 20 kilometers away from that spot. So that's how difficult the invasion operation is on time.
All right, let's go back.
I have a question for Craig Singleton. I just have a question about the success of China's influence operations in democracies. I mean, it doesn't seem like they're having a lot of success in the established democracies in shaping public opinion. As a matter of fact, public opinion has gone against China most recently. So perhaps more so in emerging democracies, they're shaping public opinion. But I don't see a lot of that either. I see them influencing like leadership, like Solomon Islands, for example, throwing over Taiwan for mainland China, but the people were against it.
Yeah.
So where's the real success in the influence operations with public opinion?
No, it's a great question. And I think part of the challenge with assessing this is the lack of information. Gallup does a few surveys every year, but there isn't. And usually, you're right, it's alliance partners. So you see like 16 countries, but they're all Western European. And we aren't looking at a lot of countries in Africa to understand where this is playing out. I think one example where it really did play out was information campaigns about China's response to COVID, contrasting it with how the Americans responded to COVID. And so Voice of America did tremendous polling over time to show that the narratives that the Chinese were propagating abroad, that we're in control, we have an organized response, we are not haphazard or chaotic. But look at what's happening in the United States in particular, was amplified in these information ecosystems. And then there was a very, very clear link between views on Chinese governance as orderly and ours as chaotic. And that was, I think, just a sort of a microcosm of what we're seeing. I think my fear in Taiwan in particular and others is that the Chinese will maybe assess that they've thrown the kitchen sink, the non-kinetic kitchen sink at these problems and still fall short. The DPP could still win. And then they'll assess, they have to go back to the drawing board, right? We spent billions of dollars, we spent all of this effort, we did all of these things, we were piloting and probing, and it still didn't work. And I fear that that could lead them to say we need to go even more escalatory. And either way, whatever happens in January, it will probably be one of two outcomes. One is they succeed somehow in shaping an environment, and they can say, we can now replicate this model other places, and it worked. And we didn't have to go to war, which I think they would lose. Or secondarily, we failed, in which case we have to ramp up and rethink what we're doing because we do everything at this challenge and we still fell short. That's where I think this election is so important.
Make a real quick comment in following up on that. I would agree. I think if you look at both the United States and European countries, Western democracies, and so forth, you can see how there's been a dramatic decline in general views of the PRC. I also think it's true that PRC influence operations have been primarily directed at elite opinion, and they're not so successful at it now. But if you take a look back over the last 20 years, the last quarter century, I would argue the PRC has actually been very effective in influencing elite opinion in the United States with diplomats and academics and media commentators and so forth. Sort of that model is breaking down a little bit now, but it has been very successful in working to shape U.S. policy again over the last quarter century or so.
Quickly to the point about the effectiveness of PRC influence operation in the global South, especially, and just I think it's Craig is absolutely right. I mean, not enough is being really put there in terms of the research, but and it's specifically related to Africa. That we point out a good research study that was done by Joshua Eisman in the U.S. Institute of Peace, published earlier this year about China's media propaganda in Africa. It's one of those, I think, one of the rare studies right now that's really gone into looking at the various mechanisms and tools that the PRC is utilizing in Africa. And it documents very well in terms of other sort of agencies that are also engaged in this broader influence apparatus, which is that not a lot of organizations do look at, which is the Chinese Communist Party's international liaison. That's another influence apparatus that hasn't really been given a lot of play, but in Africa, it is very much a central player in its broader influence efforts. Okay, questions. I think I'm going to this gentleman right there.
My name is Bo Yang. I'm a recent graduate. So I have two questions. The first one is, what's Ke position in terms of cross-strait relations? My second question is, what's the legal process for Taiwan to achieve independence, given the current political climate in Taiwan?
Questions for our friends. No one says about policy and legal process.
You beat me because the equivalent my view. You can say that's my personal view that he said one thing they say another thing tomorrow. Usually those are very complicated. So it's difficult for me to really pin down about his positions. He said that Taiwan has to stand up to China. At the same time, that I also believe that we need to a certain extent, deceive China to a certain extent in order to win peace. But in the state diplomacy, just cannot do that. You do not deceive your opponents, even though it's your opponent. Then you have to be honest with them. As for the Taiwan, I think the consensus in Taiwan is that Taiwan is already independent. There's no need to declare independence. And I do not think Taiwan is in any position that he aspire for declare independence. So that this election, whether that's William Lai or whoever the president, but the so-called declare independence is not part of the options that people advocate.
Independence is not an issue, when there's upcoming election. All right, well, please join me in thanking our panelists for